episode, we'll be chatting to Jackie Crichton, who's the Literary Associate at the Royal Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh. Hi Jackie, it's really exciting to have you here today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you. It's a relatively nice day in Edinburgh today. We had torrential rain at the weekend, so this is an exciting kind of getting back into summer moment. Today's one of my work days. I'm part-time, and I do quite enjoy my work days because it means my little person is at nursery and I can get my head in the game.
Yeah, oh, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I've got a little one at nursery as well and one at school, so I know exactly what you mean. When they're actually at nursery, you can just get in the zone and actually get some work done as well. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into theatre?
I came up to Edinburgh for university when I was 19, and I did English literature. And part of my English literature degree, I had like the option to do some kind of extra bits, one of which I chose in my final year to do an undergraduate course in playwriting, and that was run by a fantastic playwright called Nicola McCartney. And I think it became quite clear to us both quite quickly that I didn't want to be a writer, but she was like, you've got this mind and this knowledge of drama and like this interest in literature. I think you should look at dramaturgy or like literary work in general. Is that something you're interested in? I was like, yes, absolutely. I didn't know it existed until you told me. And from there, I kind of set down this path of, being really focused on that as my the thing that I wanted to do, which led me to doing a master's in playwriting at Edinburgh, still without particularly wanting to be a playwright. And from there, I kind of made my way.
That's really interesting how the course in playwriting actually got you interested in the kind of literary side of things as well. Did you, as part of your MA, did you kind of have to write scripts, or were you able to kind of put that into practice?
I wrote 3 plays. It was really intense.
Oh, wow.
It was an MSc, which is just like a little distinction between undergraduate and postgraduate in Scotland. But it culminates in a rehearsed reading at the Traverse in the festival. So it's a high pressure environment for an early writer. Absolutely invaluable, and certainly everything we learned about craft, and it was quite a practical course in that it brings we had a session with a designer and a lighting designer. Like, we learned about all the kind of surrounding parts of a play being on stage and how we make theatre. So I didn't necessarily thrive writing plays, but where I kind of absolutely loved my master's was where I was, part of a cohort, giving people notes, learning about more plays, meeting all these people, and that was fantastic for me.
Yeah, I guess even kind of not wanting to be a writer yourself, kind of having that experience of how plays work and everything that goes into putting on a piece of theatre probably helps you in your job now, I guess.
Yeah, and I do slightly feel like there is a bit of me that's like, I've had to write a play, I've had to have it put on in front of people at the Traverse. Like, at least I understand like a teeny tiny bit of what these writers are going through in terms of like the emotional and the exposure side of things. And I've walked a few steps in their shoes, I guess is what I'm saying. So I feel like it makes it a little bit easier for me to be helpful and supportive of them.
It sounds like you had ambitions really to work in kind of a literary department setting fairly early on, really, while you were still kind of at uni. And so what did you do next after you finished your course? How did you get involved in that?
So during my master's, at the time, it wasn't kind of the done thing that if you were on a writing master's, you would do a placement. But because, I'd gone into this course very strongly and openly saying, this is what I want to do. So, I said, please, can I do a placement? And they placed me with Playwright Studio Scotland, which is Scotland's playwriting development organisation. So with them for about 3 months, I helped organise an open space, which was asking, what's next for playwriting in Scotland. So I forged these really great connections with Playwright Studio Scotland, and I met a lot of playwrights, and I just learned so much in that space of time. Fast forward a bit, I did a little bit of work for them in the festival at their bookshop, their play bookshop, which is amazing. And then I kind of graduated and didn't have anything coming up, so I just needed to find some work, and I wanted it to be kind of arts related if possible. And I just got this short-term contract at Creative Carbon Scotland, which is like a sustainability organisation in Scotland that kind of goes around all the funded organisations, advising them and helping them become kind of more environmentally friendly. And, you know, I stumbled into it almost, and I was just doing admin for them. But the great thing about that was that they sent me around quite a lot of organisations that I probably wanted to work in. So I'd be like chapping up at the EIF for 2 weeks, being like, oh, cool, this is how this works. From there, Playwright Studio were hiring, and I was really lucky to get that position, which was, the title was Administrative and Communications Coordinator. So I did that for a few years.
It's really interesting to hear kind of that journey, people going to kind of become involved in a literary department, because I think it's so different with everyone. It's one of those kind of careers where there's not a real kind of set route to kind of getting into it. There's lots of different ways you can.
Oh, it's so tough. Like you mentioned you wanted to talk about what advice you would give to other people, but you're right, there's no obvious route in. There aren't that many assistant roles, and even for an assistant role these days, you probably need to have some level of professional experience. It is tough. There just aren't that many jobs.
Quite a lot going on in terms of the new writing scene in Scotland, isn't it? You talked about the Playwright Studio. When I'm posting opportunities on our blog, I quite often see things pop up for that. So what's kind of going on there in Scotland with new writing?
Playwright Studio is fantastic. They run mentoring and New Playwrights Awards and professional development programs for playwrights. And they also kind of hold this quite nice space where they there's a lot of debate that they kind of put on panel discussions and things, and you know, they're a bit of a I guess a grouping system that, you know, playwrights can come together and feel supported by a Playwright Studio, which is phenomenal. And they are very close to the Scottish Society of Playwrights, which is the playwriting union in Scotland, who are also really, you know, helpful and supportive of writers, especially in terms of contracting and making sure that they're treated well. So those two kind of organisations really kind of hold up a standard in playwriting in Scotland. In terms of new writing, obviously we have the Traverse Theatre also in Edinburgh, and their whole reason for being is new writing. So they are supportive of that. Jemima Levick, who previously was the artistic director of Stella Quines, has just moved to Play Pine and Pint, which is a lunchtime theatre, and they produce actually a load of plays, short plays, you know, 45 minutes at lunchtime, 3 characters kind of thing. But it's actually how a lot of new writers get their kind of first shot of putting actors on stage and working with a director, and you know, so that's a really, really great route in for people in Scotland. We have National Theatre of Scotland, who do a lot of artist development work and make some incredible things. And the Tron is also works very creatively with their artists too. So there is a nice group there. That's all quite central belty, and there are like great things happening in Pitlochry and Inverness and Skye and all around the country in various theatres and art centres too. So yeah, I feel like Scotland does quite well for new writing opportunities.
Can you tell us about your role at the Lyceum and what it involves?
Sure. So I often think of my role as being split into 3 sections, which would be scripts, programming, and artist development. There's crossover between those 3 areas, and I would say that scripts and artist development are the bigger parts of that. By scripts, I mean commissions, I mean rights, I mean R&Ds, meetings with writers, all of these kind of things. Reading, we run a reading committee at the Lyceum, which is really great. So all of that kind of falls into the script category. Artist development, we're very excited this year to have 22 artists attached to the Lyceum. So that's 1 writer in residence with our youth theatre, which has been amazing, funded by Creative Scotland, and they've been very, very helpful with that. And our L20 programme, which is this year 21 artists that are attached to the theatre and across all disciplines. So, you know, writers, directors, producers, choreographers, designers, everyone. They're all attached to the Lyceum to kind of try and learn from the Lyceum through this time and create a bit of a network, which obviously is very, very difficult to establish in COVID times at the moment. So we're trying to we're working very hard on that, and it's going hopefully very well so far. I feel like it's going well. The 21 artists might say something else. And then programming, which pre-COVID we would announce a whole season, so there'd be kind of a year of plays kind of announced at once, and then maybe some smaller announcements with festival work or whatever later in the year.
And how do you form relationships with new writers? Because you don't accept unsolicited scripts directly, is that right?
We don't have an open script submission, or we don't have like a window that we do anything like that in. In general, I mean, obviously we still get sent scripts and we read them and respond appropriately and kindly, I think. We don't tend to work with very early career writers just because largely of our architecture, we have a very big stage and a very big auditorium, and it's not usually one that new writers would automatically go kind of straight on with a very early play. Saying that, the world has changed. We're doing smaller scale stuff now with less people in. Like the questions of scale are a bit different than they used to be. The best way to get in touch with the Lyceum is either through your agent, or we have the L20 program, which will run again in the future, and that accepts writers alongside the other theatre creatives, or just dropping an email really. And as you pointed out, we don't have open submissions, so it's not a window or anything, or we don't guarantee detailed feedback or anything like that, but we're kind of open to learning about people, I guess, is the main thing.
Interesting what you say about having that big space there as well, because it's probably not necessarily the right thing for a very, very early stage writer. It's kind of that's something that perhaps comes much later down the line.
Yeah.
There's kind of a responsibility there, I guess.
A lot of responsibility, because sometimes it's not always a good safeguarding measure to put someone brand new in front of 658 people a night for 3 weeks. Like, that's so exposing and can be really difficult. So yeah, it's not always the right thing from both perspectives as well. So we're very diligent about going and seeing work when it's on at other places at smaller scales, to kind of see who's coming up and who might be interested in writing for the Lyceum one day.
At the Lyceum, so you're the literary associate there. In some literary departments, it's made up of people with the job title dramaturg. And do you think there's a distinction there in kind of how you approach your kind of day-to-day role?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Obviously, dramaturgy, I think that title suggests a slightly closer proximity to the creative practice, and I would imagine people with that title probably spend more times in rehearsal rooms than I do. I do work creatively with writers. I do go into R&Ds and I do give feedback and notes, and we have really great discussions, but it's not necessarily something that is the sole part of my job. I also imagine that those dramaturgs do a lot of the admin-y kind of things that I do as well.
I see, yeah, that kind of distinction there between kind of, I suppose, the journey kind of, it's always the journey beyond the script, isn't it? To kind of get it on the stage, but kind of being there during rehearsals and perhaps...
Yeah, there's so many different levels of dramaturgy, aren't there? There's when you're even just talking about an idea, there's a level of dramaturgy there where you're trying to kind of make sure that the concept is both what the writer wants to write, but also what the organisation is expecting to produce. And then, there's the drafts as they come in, and making sure that you're being responsive and open to the writer and trying to help them and support them through that writing process. And then there's any R&Ds you might do, which have dramaturgical input, and then the rehearsal process where everything gets a bit more real. And then so there's lots of levels of dramaturgy, and we also have an artistic director who's a playwright and dramaturg, and both of our associate artists, Zinni Harris and Wills Wilson, are very adept at those roles as well. So, and we work with freelance dramaturgs, which I think is a good thing, to bring in different eyes and different voices and different perspectives. So I think across that we cover off dramaturgy very, very thoroughly. So it doesn't need to be my sole purpose in my job.
And so, what would you say? I mean, it sounds like you do lots of different things in a day, but what does a regular day look like for you?
A regular day, I would usually have a fair few meetings, like maybe one internal one and two kind of with either people that are writers or or we're planning an R&D and I need to check in about something. And it's quite nice now because a lot of those might have been phone calls before, but actually now they're Zooms. So it's almost a little bit kind of more personable to the Lyceum's L20 programme. It takes up a fair amount of time and planning just to make sure that we make sure to have kind of at least 2 things a month that they get involved in. And then missions undergoing that I have to make sure that all the contracting is done right, because, you know, there's lovely creative parts about being a literary associate or in a literary role, but essentially if you don't do the bit where you make sure everyone has been appropriately contracted and paid, like that's the part that actually, you know, makes a huge difference to people's lives if they don't get their invoice paid on time. So that's something that I'm very mindful of, even if it's not the most exciting part of my job. So it's kind of a mixture of admin, and then I try to structure my days so that if I have reading to do, it happens at a time that is kind of a nice time to read. I don't love trying to like race through a script at 8 p.m. and so I can get to bed or whatever. I like applying fresh eyes if possible. So if I need to do some reading, I'll try and structure some time in the day to make sure that I'm giving the play the best amount of my attention that I can.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's definitely a difficult one when you've got lots to read, I guess, isn't it? You know, kind of doing that at a time where you feel that you can give it, you know, your full attention. And what do you think makes a good script?
It's funny, I was talking about this with someone yesterday, and it just so happens we have two scripts that we're kind of working on at the moment. They're both about, they're both these amazing scripts where each writer is really digging into something that they're unsure about, and they're investigating it almost from every angle and really prodding at it. And I think those ones both were really affecting for me because they each have such a strong idea of what the question is that they haven't been able to answer yet, or society hasn't been able to answer yet, that they're trying to answer. But it's also that they have a real clarity of purpose, and this is what this play is about, and I know it is, and I'm just going to write this, which I think is a really strong statement when you're writing a play, to know exactly what you're trying to do with it. So I think that is something that makes a really good play. I'm also very drawn to story as a rule. Like, as I said, I did an English literature degree. I'm quite a reader. I'm quite literary in general. So I'm quite attracted to really strong stories.
Do you think there are any kind of common pitfalls that new writers fall into when they're just starting out?
Yeah, I think one thing I see quite a lot, especially with early career writers and especially with their first plays, is that they're so full of energy and ideas, which is fantastic and should absolutely be encouraged and harnessed. But sometimes all the ideas and all the kind of themes get put into one play, and it can just be too much for one play to hold. So often when I'm talking to a new playwright about a play that I think has fallen into that mold, you know, we talk about restraint and like knowing exactly what it is that this play is about, and then you can, you know, write play 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it is, can address some of the other ideas. But I think restraint can be really, really important at an early stage.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's interesting that you say that, because we work with new writers at London Playwrights, and that's a note that I give out quite frequently, that actually this could be, it could almost be 3 or 4 plays what I'm reading, because there's so much in there, which I think in some ways it's a really good thing for a writer to kind of have too much material, but in another way it's actually really challenging, because then how do you kind of edit that down and, you know, kind of exercise that restraint to kind of stick with one idea and really explore that fully, I guess. And so would you have any advice, we touched on this earlier a little bit, would you have any advice for aspiring literary creatives who maybe want to kind of get involved with the literary department?
It's tough. It's really tough. I think it's worth acknowledging that, because there just aren't that many jobs. They're probably a little bit more prevalent in London, and, you know, not every theatre has a literary role or a literary department in any form, particularly ones that don't tend to have much of a remit for making any new work. For example, my role is only like 18 months old or something. It was created, and so this is the first kind of proper literary role at the Lyceum, and it's 2 days a week. You know, it's not like I'm running a department of 12 or what have you. I think the best thing that people who want to work in this kind of role could do is to read a lot, get to know a lot about theatre, try and build relationships wherever possible with the professional industry, but also I think one thing that I really benefited from early on was developing relationships with playwrights personally, who I would read their work and be involved with them and build their trust and respect. And that's the kind of learning that's quite hard to do in a university or in a course potentially, but it's also so crucial to, once you actually have the job, to be able to treat writers right and make sure that you're supporting them. So, and I think that's the thing that can sometimes get missed out. So I would definitely work hard on building those kind of relationships. I mean, potentially this is a bit exposing for me, but when I applied for this job, at the bottom of my application letter, I wrote a list of playwrights. I was like, I think these people I think would all vouch for me being good at this and being a good person, essentially, which is quite a statement. But essentially, I view my job as, obviously I work for the Lyceum and the organisation and the creative team there, but I'm also making sure that all the writers are being treated well and hopefully being respected and what have you. So I do feel that it's important to understand it from that perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, a writer as well, kind of who's submitting their work to, to a theatre or putting themselves out there, it is exposing, isn't it? And it is kind of, you're quite vulnerable really, because you don't know sometimes whether your work is good or whether the theatre will like it. So I think having someone kind of there who'll kind of have your back in that way and treat you nicely, it's kind of a bit make or break, isn't it? Because I think if you have a bad experience, it could really put a writer off writing again.
And I think we're quite lucky at the Lyceum because and it's more common now than it was when David was first appointed, but obviously we have a playwright, David Gregg, as our artistic director, and so it's lent a very writerly ambition to the theatre, and has meant that we've always had someone who does understand to a degree what happens if you send in a draft and no one gets back to you within a reasonable amount of time, and how that makes an artist feel. So that's probably been quite helpful for having that understanding too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really means a lot to the writers who kind of try and get involved with you and your work as well. And would you have any advice for writers if they do want to work with the Lyceum? What advice would you give them in terms of how to kind of get involved there?
Worth pointing out that the Lyceum very much views itself as Edinburgh's civic theatre and being rooted in Scotland and Scottish stories. So while we work with writers from all around the UK and other parts of the world, we do feel a particularly strong remit to support writers and artists who are based in Scotland or are Scottish. So I guess that's quite helpful to know for writers who might be from other parts of the UK that there's usually a reason that we're working with people in Scotland or who are Scottish. I think one thing that's quite important when you are approaching a theatre, especially if you don't already have a relationship with them in some form or another, even as an audience member, is to get to know their work a little bit, and what kind of things that they program, and what their artistic vision is, essentially. Because I'm always that much more interested in a writer who comes to me and says, I saw Touching the Void and I thought it was great for these reasons, and I've written a play that I think you'll think is good for these reasons and would be a good fit for the Lyceum. I read lots of things that couldn't possibly go on the Lyceum stage for various reasons, and I'm happy to get to know a writer, but equally it's always feels slightly more appropriate when it's something that has been chosen for the Lyceum.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice in general for new writers, and we talk about that kind of a lot on some of our workshops and things like that, not just kind of firing out submissions to every single theatre, really think about the places where you'd like to eventually see your work on stage and why as well.
Yeah, and I would rather say if a writer doesn't have that script, say that they haven't written the five-hander that would fill the Lyceum stage or thematically suits us yet. I'd rather they then came to me with like, I don't have any, like, I have this previous script, you might want to read it, here it is. But also the thing that I think would really suit the Lyceum is I want to do this adaptation of this classic play with this slant on it, like a pitch like that. I think, and this is why the Lyceum will like it, or it's a bit like what you did with Pride and Prejudice, sort of, or it's a bit like what you did with Zinnie Harris's Duchess of Malfi, or something like that. So you kind of get a sense of, that they've targeted you for a reason.
Yeah, not just that sense like you want to get your work on stage, it's you want to get your work on this stage, and these are the reasons why. I think that's a really, really useful piece of advice in general. That's kind of the end of my questions there. I had a couple of bonus questions, if it's okay.
Go for it.
So what's your favourite play?
Probably my favourite play is Our Town by Thornton Wilder. I have like quite a strong, like, not so much in my actual life, but in my reading life, I have quite a sentimental bent sometimes, and Our Town just gets me every time. I've only seen it twice. I saw it at the Almeida and I saw it at the Royal Exchange, and both productions were worlds apart, but both completely incredible and just made me love the play even more.
And who's your favourite playwright?
I was worried that you were going to ask that. I feel like it'd be quite impolitic of me to pick one. There are so many playwrights I'm interested in, a lot of whom we work with already, like Hannah Lavery, I think is incredible, Steph Smith. Obviously, I really respect David Gregg and his work. Zinnie Harris is our associate artist, and the play that we've just been doing R&D on is probably one of the best things I've read for a few years. Like Douglas Maxwell's one of my favourite playwrights in Scotland. He writes really beautiful, heartfelt plays and that are really funny as well. And Ella Hickson, I'm slightly obsessed with at the moment as well. I would say I'm not terribly consistent on who my favourite is, which you're probably getting the flavour of that right now.
Yeah, that was a really great answer. Someone asked me that once and I just went completely blank because there's so many and it's just so hard to pick one, isn't it? Because there's so many different reasons why you might like the work of a playwright. So
yeah, and I'm also very guilty of like just saying the last person I read. So,
and finally, this might also be one of those questions actually, but what's the best production you've ever seen?
One of the best productions I've ever seen is probably Black Watch, which was one of the National Theatre of Scotland's first kind of big shows. It was written by Gregory Burke and directed by John Tiffany, and it it went on for a long time and toured the world, but the movement and the story and the politics of it were all incredible. And on a slightly similar bent, Rona Munro's The James plays, I have such strong memories of watching them in Festival Theatre in the August of 2014 and being kind of absolutely blown away by the scale and ambition and the breadth of them. So those two probably ring out to me.
That's great, thank you. So thanks so much for today. It's great to speak to you. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I know that our followers and subscribers will find it really interesting as well. There's some really good advice in there.
Oh,
so thanks.
Nice to see you.